year was 525 BC, and the desert winds over Egypt carried more than just sand and sun. They carried tension. Ominous, sacred. Ancient Egypt was no ordinary land. It was a civilization soaked in ritual, mysticism, and the unwavering belief that the world was ruled not just by men, but by gods. The Nile wasn't just a river, it was divine. The sun wasn't just heat, it was the eye of Ra. And the creatures that walked among them weren't merely animals. Many were sacred, some untouchable, but none were more revered than the cat. In ancient Egypt, cats were not pets, they were protectors, spirits of the home, guardians of children, embodiments of the goddess Bastet who brought fertility, peace, and divine protection. Killing a cat intentionally or accidentally was not just taboo, it was a capital crime. People mourned their cats like family members. Some even shaved their eyebrows in grief when one died. In temples, offerings were made to them. In homes, they were cherished. Cats didn't serve humans in Egypt. Humans served cats. And far from the warmth of the Nile, in the colder, calculating halls of a rising empire, one man saw opportunity in that devotion. Cambyses II, king of Persia, the son of the great Cyrus the Great, Cambyses had inherited a powerful empire and a hunger to expand it. His army had swallowed Mesopotamia and pushed toward the Mediterranean. But now, his eyes were fixed on a greater prize. Egypt, a land older than Persia. A culture so ancient its origins were whispered, not written. A civilization that refused to kneel. Cambyses knew this would not be an ordinary war. Egypt wasn't just fortified with stone, it was armored with faith. So, Cambyses studied Egypt, not as a warrior, but as a predator. He read their laws, he learned their gods, and then he found it. The perfect weakness. The cat, and that's when the unthinkable began. As Cambyses prepared his forces to march on Egypt's northeastern gateway, the city of Pelusium, he issued orders that confused even his own men. Cats were to be gathered. Thousands of them. Stray cats, sacred cats, domestic cats, temple cats. If it had fur and whiskers, it was seized. Wagons were loaded, crates built. The mewing of terrified animals echoed through Persian camps. Soldiers were clawed and bitten. No one understood until they reached Pelusium, and the order was given. The front line of the Persian army would not carry shields of iron or wood. They would carry cats. Some soldiers tied them in sacks and strapped them to their bodies. Others cradled them in their arms like infants. Banners were painted with cat symbols. Armor bore feline images. Cambyses had turned his entire army into a blasphemous parade of terror order. On the high stone walls of Pelusium, Egyptian soldiers stared in disbelief. First came confusion, then shock, then horror. This wasn't war. This was sacrilege, marching toward them, because in Egypt to harm a cat was to invite divine wrath. To kill one in battle, even by accident, was to curse yourself for eternity. These weren't just animals, they were holy, and Cambyses knew it. The Egyptians stood paralyzed. Archers took aim, and then faltered. Commanders shouted orders, but soldiers hesitated. They weren't facing a traditional enemy. They were facing their own gods, held hostage by a foreign king. Cambyses had created the most powerful shield in history. Belief his soldiers advanced. Slowly, confidently, the Egyptians watched, gripped by terror. Some Persians even released cats onto the battlefield, letting them roam freely in the sand, weaving between the legs of stunned warriors. Chaos followed, and then came the attack. Pack gates were breached, the Persians poured in, and the Egyptians, still unsure whether to fight or pray, were overwhelmed. Their faith, once a shield, had become a prison. They had been forced to choose between defending their homeland and violating the sacred. And in that impossible choice, they hesitated and lost everything. Pelusium fell in a single day, not to swords, not to numbers, but to a strategy so insane, so unthinkably clever, that it carved itself into the bones of history. Cambyses didn't just conquer a city. He shattered Egypt's identity. Their gods had failed to protect them, their morals had been used against them, and their greatest strength, their spiritual devotion, had become their undoing. And Cambyses wasn't finished. City after city fell as fear spread down the Nile. Some surrendered without a single blow, not because of Persian might, but because of the psychological carnage left behind. Egyptians no longer feared defeat. They feared what they would be forced to become to win. Cambyses mocked their rituals, desecrated their temples. Some sources say he defiled the mummies of pharaohs, dragging them from their tombs in front of weeping priests. Every act was more than destruction. It was a message. Your gods cannot save you. And the message worked. The Greeks would later write about this battle with stunned fascination. Herodotus, the father of history himself, couldn't decide whether Cambyses was a genius or a madman, but he wrote about what happened at Pelusium, and he knew it was something the world would never forget. So why did Cambyses use cats as shields? Because he understood something that most generals never consider. War isn't always fought with weapons. Sometimes it's fought with meaning. Cambyses didn't attack Egypt's walls, he attacked their spirit. He didn't just invade their land, he invaded their faith. And in doing so, he showed the world that the most dangerous weapon in history isn't a sword, it isn't an army, it isn't fire or steel, it's knowing exactly what your enemy will never strike. Like stories like this? Want more insane but true moments from history? Then don't just scroll away, subscribe right now. Hit that like button if this blew your mind, and drop a comment below. What would you have done if you were the Egyptian general at Pelusium? Fight or fold? We've got more real stories coming. Battles fought with bees, weapons disguised as gods, and forgotten wars that sound like fiction. Because history isn't just about what happened, it's about asking, what would you do if it happened to you?